One of the things that I think that is similar and happens to fit me very well is I like startups. And in my mind, this small city feels a lot like a startup. They're stretched for resources, and there are far more jobs to do than there are people that are able to do them.
Welcome to another episode of the Gov Gab podcast. I'm your host, Brian Draco. Thanks for being along in another episode, and excited to get back to the Midwest for episode 10 today, where we get the opportunity to speak with Ryan Wallace, who is the city manager for the City of Crescent, Oklahoma. And Ryan has a really unique journey that he shares with us of, how he was an entrepreneur, ran some businesses out west, and then ultimately came back home to be closer to his wife's family in Oklahoma. And from there, it kind of slowly started. He was at the fire department to begin and then kind of worked his way up in different roles, was helping with IT and those type of things, and now has been the city manager for a short time, about a year and a half or so, 2 years, for the City of Crescent. So it was a really nice conversation, a lot of really deep insight into a small town and a lot of things that they go through. So I think that might appeal for a lot of the individuals out there listening. So I hope you guys really enjoy this episode. Without further ado, let's jump into my chat today with Ryan Wallace. Ryan, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you. I know, on our Gov Gab kind of podcast series, we talk with jurisdictions, both large and small. I know you're a city manager of a smaller jurisdiction there in Oklahoma. So I was excited to kind of learn a little bit more about some of the things you guys are doing there, some of the opportunities, as well as some of the challenges you guys are having. But I did want to start back, if it's okay, because I'm always intrigued, especially folks that decide to get in the public sector and kind of have those different roles. Can you share just a little bit about maybe your background? How did you always want to, kind of as you were growing up as a kid and stuff, want to be involved in the local government? Or is that something that kind of spawned in college and later? Can you tell us about that to start off?
No, actually, I really didn't have any interest in public sector at all. I've always been a private sector guy, and was intrigued by government, but I really didn't understand the difference between local government versus state and federal. And it wasn't until later in life that I became interested in my community and involved with the community that I started to see perhaps there were places that I could assist and help out. So my journey started. I met my wife in college. She was a accounting major. I was a business major, and after college, we opened a business in California at the time that was an automotive manufacturing business, and we grew it from a garage startup to about 22 million a year in sales. And then we sold that and moved to Oklahoma about 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, we chose Oklahoma. We'd lived in other places, but we chose Oklahoma to be close to her family. And we really were looking for a rural area, a place that we could buy some land and have animals and really change from a California lifestyle that we'd lived previous. So Oklahoma was a real heartland change for us. We changed quite a lot and really fell in love with the communities out here. We chose a town called Crescent as it was close to my in-laws, but also it was an area that we saw as being in the path of progress. We could see that Oklahoma City was expanding north, and we felt like the 74 corridor was going to be a good place in the future. And so that was a lot of the reason for that decision at the time.
And what was the transition maybe in your head to say, hey, I want to get more now that I'm here in Oklahoma, I want to get more involved in the local government and the community? Was there one thing that happened, or was it just kind of the natural process of wanting to be involved more?
No, I was tricked is the real is the real answer to that. I was talked into joining the local fire department. So a lot of the neighbors that I had um, saw me out doing things outdoors and doing projects and completing those projects, and um, thought that I would be a good hand on the fire department. So um, one of my neighbors made a joke that don't worry, it's only one Thursday evening a month and a Saturday in January every year. That's all the time it'll take. And of course, it couldn't be farther from the truth. Volunteer fire ended up being a very time-consuming task, just with training, and then the amount of time that it requires. That was about 10 years ago, and from that, I became more involved with city government. I started an IT business about the same time. I tend to be a serial entrepreneur, so I found myself bored and decided that there were quite a lot of opportunities in this area for IT work, and then started to realize that there were some real specific needs in transportation logistics for oil and gas. And that was really one of the first projects that I started out here. And that turned into doing some work for the city government. And that was really how I was introduced to city government. And um, there were several opportunities that I had to onboard here, but really the most significant was just doing IT work and starting to watch the mechanism behind the scene.
So how did ultimately the transition to city manager happen?
Well, that was an interesting transition. I was asked several times throughout the last 7 or 8 years, and I guess I ran out of excuses is the real answer. But really, I started out here as IT, as I said, as a contractor, and then I was asked to do PIO, Public Information Officer. I moved pretty quickly from that to Assistant City Manager, and then we had an outgoing city manager who recommended me for interim, which I agreed to do and help to replace that position. And shortly after, the city council asked if I would just take the position permanently, and so I agreed to. And I've been in the role of city manager for about 14, 15 months now.
Okay. What would you say is because it's interesting, some of the other city managers I've talked with, like this
Mhm.
is like it was like a career for them, right? They've been doing it for 20, 25 years. They're kind of in the realm, kind of new to the process there, going assistant city manager and city manager. What do you think is probably the biggest, maybe unspoken challenge you found out once taking the position that maybe you didn't realize coming into it?
Well, certainly for me, as being a public sector guy and moving into or rather a private sector guy moving into public sector, the 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 rules are really all different. And starting just at the top, the accounting rules that govern private sector versus public sector are just vastly different. Um, there really, I mean, I think that there's probably very few similarities in all reality. One of the things that I think that is similar and it happens to fit me very well is I like startups. And in my mind, this small city feels a lot like a startup. They're stretched for resources, and there are far more jobs to do than there are people that are able to do them. And so, as a city manager in this particular city, I found that I end up wearing a lot of hats, and I like that. I like the challenge of having a lot of different jobs to do, and find that's fits my personality pretty well.
So, what are some of the things, and especially with the small community, and you guys are, I don't know the exact mileage, I didn't do the math, but outside of Oklahoma City, right? And you said with
Hmm.
the 74 corridor coming there,
Right.
what are some things you guys are trying to do to, I mean, is there a push to help increase the population, bring in new business, or is it kind of, hey, we're happy with the size we are and what we're doing as a community? What are some of those conversations you guys are having with council and maybe to progress the city?
So the interesting thing, Crescent has had a zero growth or no growth mentality for many years, and and I think that there are still a lot of folks in the city that would like to see it stay like it was. But I think that there's a disconnect about what the city has been traditionally and the work that people did to make it in effect grow. Really, there's only two directions. There's either growth or decline. There's really no homeostasis in keeping any entity the same size. You have to actively grow just to maintain. And if cities try to have no growth, they really tend to decline. And that's really where I found this city 10 years ago when we moved here. Um, there were a lot of things that were cute about the town, but we saw a lot of opportunity, particularly in the Main Street area. There were a lot of dilapidated buildings, and I really saw a lot of opportunity for growth and rehabilitation. And then over the next decade, we saw the city fall further into decline and disrepair. And so that's maybe one of the driving factors, one of the things that I thought that I could help with. One of the things that I was shocked to learn is Oklahoma is the only state in the United States that doesn't funnel property taxes to cities for the purpose of maintenance. That's a unique Oklahoma thing, and it actually works. It is very difficult for bedroom communities like Crescent, because a lot of the folks, that own property here actually work outside the area and they do a lot of shopping in those areas. So for communities like Crescent, without a real vibrant retail environment, the resources to maintain the city are really limited. So one of the big challenges that we see here in Crescent, and one of the things that we acknowledge and are working towards, is growth of that retail. Because we're such a small city and we're effectively 1 square mile, we don't really have a lot of area to bring in new retail. So that's been a discussion that we've had with council, is annexing more property into the town so that we can develop some retail areas. We have a 74 highway is basically our main road through the middle of town. And there are some really gorgeous historic buildings along that, but most of those or many of those are dilapidated and and vacant. I would say that there's about a 50% vacancy in that area. And some of the ones that have businesses in them or have are occupied aren't occupied in a way that it generates revenue for the city. They're either occupied by as office space, or they're occupied by there's effectively a personal museum in one of the prime buildings downtown. So really, for us to rehabilitate that downtown area, we need to start generating revenue somewhere else. And I think probably the way that we're going to have to do that is by opening up some new retail areas, where we can bring in some stores, maybe anchor stores, and some fast food.
Is that something? Are you guys? And again, I'm a complete novice with this, so let me kind of go on this tangent with this question, see if you follow. Do you go on actively pursue? Like, are you guys putting out there to developers or other folks to say, hey, we're kind of open for business, if you will. We have some areas here, some of the opportunity, or are folks coming and looking there a lot and just seeing if it's a fit or not? How does that all work to bring in these new businesses?
I think that's true in both cases, but yes, absolutely, we are looking for opportunities, looking for stores that would consider locating here. But also, we have some challenges that we know we have to overcome for stores that have showed interest and maybe have passed on town or been unable to locate here for one reason or another. And one of those big challenges in our town happens to be the sewer system. We actually have a sewer system that stops at about halfway, geographically about halfway through our town. It covers the north half of the town, but the south half of the town is actually not covered. So, we have a Love's gas station, for example. They had to install their own lift station to be able to connect to our gravity sewer and have sewer services. Some of the other businesses along that southern part of our city actually have septic systems and private lift stations. So we know that to grow, we're actually going to need to expand, add another lift station to our city, and add more sewer resources uh, to really cover businesses in that area, and that's something that we know will be a factor in the future.
So where do you guys find that? I guess if you're not getting property taxes, you said with the uniqueness of Oklahoma, where do you guys get much? Where does a lot of the budget come in from?
Well, in the government sector, we have a 3% sales tax within the city. So there, you know, effectively, Crescent's budget is $1 million in government and $1 million in its public works. In the government section, that is primarily funded by the sales tax revenue. The majority of that goes to city services, largest being our police department. And then the public works department operates by selling water and sewer services to residents within our geographic footprint, and that generates about $1 million a year, and um, effectively is not really it doesn't operate at a at much of a profit. We end up breaking even. We've had to do a lot of very large infrastructure projects over the last few years. The largest being a waterline replacement project that was partially grant funded and partially funded by a USDA loan. And the debt service on that USDA loan has basically consumed any profit that the Public Works Department would have. So one of our challenges now is trying to find ways to grow and even maintain city services without incurring any new debt. So a lot of our push over the last year has been grant resources. We applied for 5 grants here in the last 14 months, and we've received approval on 3 of those. One of the largest is an OWRB REAP grant that we're using to replace all of the water meters in town. And the water meter project is taking some antiquated and dilapidated water meters and replacing those with new state-of-the-art ultrasonic water meters that have AMR. So right now we spend approximately 3 days per month with 3 staff members walking around town reading water meters. And we are anticipating that the AMR project will take that 24 man hours worth of labor and replace it with a 15-minute drive around town. So that's one of the areas that we are looking to improve our efficiency quite a lot, and also the accuracy of our billing. We have found that the antiquated meters are not very accurate. They don't bill for very low flow usage. So if you had a running toilet or something, for example, they actually may not register that water consumption. And also we've found that they tend to be somewhat sticky. They will lock up, and we don't know it until the next billing cycle when we see that the flow or the usage doesn't match what it has historically. The new meters actually are a lot more accurate, and they also have provisions to alert people when there's leakage. If it detects a low flow that doesn't stop, it actually flags the account, and we're able to alert residents that they might have some water waste.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, always trying to increase the efficiency of the staff, but also, yeah, if you give some insight there, you actually might recoup some dollars you guys have maybe lost over the years, probably, right? In terms of the water and
Absolutely. I think that there's I mentioned that Public Works is hamstrung right now. We feel like this is definitely a place that we will probably free up some resources, and we'll probably also see some additional cash flow in terms of the water rates aren't going up, but we're probably going to see more billing.
Well, I was curious. You mentioned earlier that you wear a lot of hats, obviously, with the trim staff and what you guys are doing. Is there anything? What would we be surprised with something you got to do throughout the day? Because you think city manager, and you kind of have a certain perception of what that role is and the things you got to deal with. Is there something where you get your hands dirty, where people would be surprised that you have to do?
Well, I think probably one of the surprises would be that I still do all the IT support for the city. So when I was hired, I actually have a split role. So I'm actually the city manager, but I'm also still the IT director. So probably one third of my time is split between IT support and building out our IT system, and the other two thirds is city management. Um,
Or so in terms of structuring your day, that obviously if you're getting pulled in a few different directions, right? What is there anything, and maybe it's you learned from your business days, right, in the private sector, any like habits you have or routines that are important for you to kind of keep you level headed throughout the day? Anything you do?
Absolutely. One of the things is that I try to band my day. So I build certain projects into certain parts of the day. And one of the biggest problems I have is interruption, of course, like anybody. So what I've built is some carve outs in my day where I'm just not available. And then I also tend to do some unhealthy things. For example, I work at night a lot. So I have a tendency, and this is a private sector thing. I have a tendency to take home a lot of work, and I do a lot of the projects that probably are really realistically Crescent projects during family time in the evenings.
And one of the things I was asked with that, and obviously, with this new role, being in as the city manager the last 15 months or so, how is it? I've heard some mixed reviews of how people deal with, the council and mayor, right? It's a different, obviously, animal, right? Getting into that. How have you dealt with that? How is that relationship there? Is there anything you've done to kind of make that relationship solid, really to improve the town?
That's an interesting question. I think we are blessed with probably the exception to virtually every rule that I've heard in terms of council manager form of government. We have a wonderful council and a really great mayor. In fact, I honestly don't think I would have taken this role if I had a council like a lot of the councils that I hear about. Ones they're constantly in turmoil and infighting. Our council tends to be pretty common sense. They understand our limitations. They understand the challenges that we have as a small town, and really, they're very unified. I mean, it's a really family feel here, and I think that has been a real blessing. Also, we've been pretty proactive on a lot of the projects that we've taken on this year, and a lot of folks, I think, understand some of the challenges we're facing and like the direction we're going. So I think in this last year, maybe the phone calls that council has had have been um, have been pretty positive. The interaction that the council has had from the public. A lot of what I hear is that folks are pretty happy with the direction of things, and I think that's made things easier for the council. And I think as a result of that, they've embraced a lot of the ideas and things that I brought to the table. I haven't really seen a lot of infighting or really any difficulty with council. I don't know that will always be the case. I certainly hope that it is because it's been a really productive year. We've gotten a lot of stuff done, and I think that that I hope that it always stays that way.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome that you have that opportunity there. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's differences, but yeah, if you can kind of meet in the middle on a lot of stuff and kind of progress things forward, it's only better for everyone. So that's pretty cool.
That's actually been like a tenet of my whole platform here as city manager. I've just tried to say, hey, we're going to get a lot more done if we can work together. And I feel like we're better together. That's sort of a saying that I use a lot, and it's heartfelt. I feel like when we work together, not pushing special interests, but just the general good and welfare of Crescent. we're going to get a lot more done, and we're going to be a lot happier. And I think that folks have embraced that idea. I've seen a lot of cooperation in areas that, folks haven't really been very cooperative in the past. They seem to be getting along really well right now. It might just be a honeymoon period, but I hope it stays this way forever.
One of the things I was really curious about, especially with the state, because again, I don't live there, and you only hear stuff on the news. How do you guys, and you've been there 10 years now, how do you get ahead of the weather? I know there's a lot of uncertainty throughout the year. Like, is there anything you can plan for, or anything you guys do as a city to, I don't know, to make sure everyone's safe, or I don't know. I'm just more curious than ever, just by where you guys are located.
Sure. Now, there's a tremendous amount of planning that goes into weather preparedness here. So as a native Californian, weather is just absolutely no factor. I mean, I have never really dealt with weather. A lot of people talk about earthquakes, and there are some programs for earthquake preparedness in California, but weather is not really something to fear necessarily. Um, my move to Oklahoma was definitely eye opening. It's the weather is very unpredictable here, and can be, of course, just very severe. So one of the first ways that I was introduced to weather preparedness is through the fire department. Our local fire department does a lot of work to prepare storm watch, storm shelter registration. That was one of the projects that I started early on, was actually developing a database and collecting storm shelter data so that folks could register storm shelters, and the fire department would be able to find them, not just with visual references or an address, but actually with GPS coordinates. Um, so the fire department does a lot. The police department does an awful lot of preparedness. Our police chief is also our emergency manager here, and I know that virtually all the firemen have been through storm spotter school, and I think most of the policemen as well. The city has taken a lot of steps to educate the public, but one of the things that we have not had in the past is a good public shelter. And one of the projects that's ongoing right now is there's a FEMA project in place right now to build a FEMA shelter at the school, at Crescent Public Schools. And so that's one of the major steps that we're taking to really prepare our community for a tornado or some other disaster. But I'll tell you, this last year has been really eye-opening. This last storm season, the last couple of months have really upset a lot of the city services. One of the things that we've experienced here this within the last couple of months is lightning storms that have disabled a good deal of our city infrastructure. We took a lightning strike to the City Hall building, which basically burned out nearly every computer in the building, including our SCADA system. The SCADA system is the computerized system that controls our water and sewer systems and reports trouble with those. That system has been completely damaged beyond repair at this point. And then we also saw some lightning strikes out on some of the remote locations throughout our city, over at gathering wells and water towers that have done damage to pumps and all kinds of things. Essentially, our city is on full manual control right now. We're having to manually control, and we put in a couple of temporary type systems, but essentially manually control all of our water pumps and high lift pumps that pump the water up to the towers, and our sewer system. All those systems are having to be controlled by men on overtime right now, and we have a contractor that's working very hard to build a new system, but it's a very large project. We're probably still another 60 days away from full implementation.
Wow, that's pretty insane. Yeah, how do you I don't even know you can manually do, I guess you can, but so how does that even, can you explain? I'm just more, again, my curiosity is piqued. Like, how do you manually get
control
that
a water
stuff running.
system.
Yeah.
Well, in a city like this, really the water pressure is generated by water in a standpipe or a elevated tower, and we have one of each of those. So really, if the water level in that tower varies a little bit, you'll see some small variation in the water pressure at your faucet. But essentially, we have we have the ability to turn on a pump, a high lift pump, which takes water from our treatment area, our clear well, and pumps it up to that tower. So essentially, how water is produced in a city like ours is we use domestic water wells that are located outside of town, about 3-4 miles out of town, and those domestic water wells produce water, untreated water, which is sent to a clear well, a treatment uh, plant, and the treatment plant chlorinates the water and stores it through for a period of time until high lift pumps pump that water up to the tower, and then it's distributed through our distribution network throughout town. So essentially, it's a function of watching tower levels, clear well levels, and turning pumps on in all of those locations at the right time to keep the water at the right level. And then the chlorination system is automatic. It's based on the volume of water passing through a system. So the more water that flows, the more chlorine flows in proportion to that. So essentially, that's the system. It's a pretty simple system, thankfully. We're not using groundwater or anything like that. If we were using groundwater and we had a water treatment plant, it would be a much harder thing to do. But because we're using domestic wells and a clear well to treat, it's actually a fairly simple system. And because of that, it's not too difficult to run. It just takes a lot of labor. It takes a lot of time. It's a lot of driving around to all those different locations. Every one of those locations that I mentioned is geographically separated. The domestic water wells, again, are the furthest one is about 5 miles out of town, and you have to actually physically drive there to turn the pump on and off.
Wow. Did you ever think 10 years ago you would be talking about domestic wells and chlorinization?
Never,
It's
never.
amazing what happens,
So
right?
my background is manufacturing, and systems are fun for me. I mean, that's interesting for me.
Yeah.
But I come from automotive manufacturing and defense. Manufacturing things for life support systems for defense. So domestic water wells were never really in my purview. I never really thought about that.
Yeah. Well, it seems like you're doing some great things, obviously, in the city and trying to progress it. Let's end on this. I'm curious, maybe, and I'll kind of leave open forum here. Any thoughts you have or advice, if you're talking to other cities, maybe it's other smaller communities, things that you've learned there that could be helpful for them. Maybe it's one tip or something to maybe help them progress. Anything you've learned in your time there, either from your role all the way from the fire department all the way up to what you're doing today. Anything in particular you'd share, something you've learned along the years?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest tip that I have, and the thing that we have done, we haven't really talked about much today, but probably one of the biggest factors in moving our fire department forward, and also the city forward, is embracing technology and data. One of the things that we have done in both of those venues, both the fire department and in the city, is we have developed databases and done a lot of work to modernize the city. Many of the cities like Crescent are still dealing with with technology that's probably 30-40 years out of date. And over the last decade, we've really turned that around. Now the city is developing applications to streamline a lot of our processes. We have a code enforcement database that we've rolled out recently that has reduced the workload dramatically. We touched briefly on the AMR system and the reduction in workload we're anticipating when that's rolled out in another few months. We've seen similar improvements at the fire department with the storm shelter registration database. We have databases that we've developed for our water system now that track and report back to the DEQ, as our Department of Environmental Quality. There's a monthly report that we have done by hand for many years. That's all electronic nowadays. Guys in their with their mobile phones are collecting that data now, and that data flows into a report that's generated automatically. There's been a lot of projects that we've done like that. A lot of them have happened internally in the city, but also with good partnerships. And I think that by really embracing that technology and streamlining operations, we've seen some really dramatic differences in our town, and also the way we communicate with our customers. We in the past have not had a really well documented system here at the city, and we're trying to change that. We're trying to improve the documentation of our internal infrastructure and projects, but also the way we communicate with customers, both in our permitting processes and certifications of different things, and in the way that we collect information from our customers. Embracing technology has been a major difference for us.
Yeah, that's really great. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, Ryan. I appreciate you sharing the story, just kind of your journey a little bit. Definitely unique, which is really cool to kind of see where you've come from and how you guys are trying to progress the city there. So thank you so much for taking some time out and sharing that with us.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed that interview with Ryan Wallace, City Manager of Crescent, Oklahoma. And just one quick ask before you run along on your day. If you don't mind, head over to iTunes, our Operate Intelligently podcast, and leave us a quick review. Give us a rating. Let us know how we're doing on this podcast, and we certainly appreciate it. It's the only way we can make this better and better each and every episode. Look forward to having you guys on the next one. I hope you guys have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.